Morning, students. It's morning here in my study. I'm going to be talking today about week 2 for our lit theory class. And this week we are reading Upstone's chapter on aesthetics, which also incorporates symbolism. I think it's sort of an interesting choice to incorporate symbolism here, and she doesn't actually have a separate section on semiotics, which is how I was taught about symbolism in grad school. So we are going to use her book as a guide, but break it out a little bit this coming week so that you're better prepared should you want to address these issues going forward in your writing or thinking about the world. So the plan for the week, early in the week, we're looking at Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market poem. That's going to be the example on which we will kind of think about and practice aesthetic readings. It's a pre-Raphaelite poem, and in Upstone, she talks about sort of different reactions to this poem, but how it, I don't know how to phrase this exactly, but why it might be a useful one to look at in terms of aestheticism. So in terms of what aestheticism is, I would say you probably practice it all the time. You see it all the time. Anytime you're talking about art, probably there's some element of aestheticism coming in at some point. Sometimes it gets referred to by the phrases sort of art for art's sake, and it's a way of looking at art and often separating it from any kind of messaging that it might have, any moral concerns, anything except beauty, really. And you might look at the beauty of the prose, you might look at, if you're thinking about this in the context of visual art, you might say, here is a painting or a photograph. When Ansel Adams takes a photograph, one of those stark black and white photos of nature, you could look at that and say, well, this is, it is enough that it is stunningly beautiful, right? When you look at a sunset, it's enough that it's stunningly beautiful. It doesn't necessarily have to have any deeper meaning. And then the question, and there's a great little Oscar Wilde quote in the Upstone chapter that sort of challenges that. The question is that enough? Is that when you look at, say, an Ansel Adams photograph or this Christina Rossetti poem, is it enough to just enjoy the beauty and appreciate how well it's represented, perhaps? Or is it, do we look for something more when we're looking at art? You might also think about there's a lot of critiques of aestheticism, and one of them, for example, is that if you consider painters, sculptors, a lot of them focused on the beauty of the female form, and if they're holding that up as their sort of symbol of this is what it means to be, high art. What happens when you are doing art that is not about a beautiful woman, right? Maybe it's about, if you look at something like, now I'm going to blank on his name because I'm terrible with names, but there's a sculptor whose work I love. Well, it'll come back to me. But if you look at the work of sculptors and painters who do not necessarily focus only on beautiful women, but other kinds of women, is that work also worthwhile? You might think about another way to look at this is think about the differences between how Hollywood approaches movies and how you might see British movies and TV shows during this pandemic. A lot of us have been watching a lot more TV. I've been watching a lot of British TV. And Hollywood is much more likely to cast very good-looking people. And in the same kind of role in the UK, you're more likely to see ordinary people. And so one thing you could think about is how does that maybe change the way you approach watching a movie or watching a TV show? Okay, so that's a little bit of framing for this. It'll make more sense, hopefully, as you read the poetry. You're going to read the poem, you're going to glance at the Wikipedia page, which just gives you a little bit of a summary of different types of responses. It's just a page. Take a minute to browse illustrations from Goblin Market. This was originally published, even though it's a very sensual poem and one might say sexy and adult, the authors insisted that it was for children, and it was published as an illustrated book with these sort of elaborate and somewhat grotesque illustrations. So take a look and think about how beauty is or isn't represented there. And then you're going to read the start of Upstone. Then if you want, there's an optional little movie you can watch that I found that is based on the poem, and you could just watch that and think about what did they take out of the poem? What did they think was worth highlighting? It is not a line by line repeat of the language of the poem. So they clearly got something different out of it. So that's something you could think about. You're going to write one journal entry for Goblin Market. I gave you some suggestions of things you could talk about, but the journal entries are meant to be your responses. So as you're going through this material, whatever is most interesting to you, that's what I'd encourage you to focus on. That's going to be, hopefully these journal entries will be seeds for what might be a paper down the road. I would recommend, like, if you run across good quotes that you're going to want to remember, there are lines that are particularly striking that you might want to use in a paper, include those in your journal entries. It'll be an aid to memory down the road. Okay, and then you also do a journal entry on aesthetics. And for the lit theory entries, what I would do is just try and maybe choose a section and put it in my own words and kind of summarize, rephrase, be sure that I understood at least a piece of it, and then write a response to it. So we're covering a lot of material very fast in this class, and I don't expect you or need you to have a comprehensive understanding of every single theory that we're going to hit on every week. Some of them are going to speak to you more than others. Hopefully, as we survey, you're going to get a sense of tools that you can use. Okay, that's a lot of intro for the first chunk of the class. We'll have class on Zoom. We will do a bunch of stuff. And then in the second half of the class, we will talk about Edgar Allan Poe and read the second half of aesthetics. So that should be fun. If any of you like horror, we're going to be reading a little horrific stuff, which should be an interesting change. Whoops, sorry about that. I got a call, but I've canceled it. Okay. That's it for the overview, and I'll see you on Wednesday. I'm gonna record, I think, 2 brief things specifically on Rossetti and Poe, just so you can go into them a little bit deeper.